All right. Thanks everyone for hopping on. I know we have more people coming in, but we will be getting started now. So thank you for joining us for our best bonus training, a look at how school districts are abusing COVID relief funds. If y'all don't know already, COVID relief funds, also known as ESSER, were given out in three different stages by the federal government during both the Trump and the Biden administrations, but the rules and what you can do with that money has changed over the course of time. So without further ado, let me just say, if you have any questions, please send them in the chat or through the Q&A function. At the end, we will allow you to raise your hands and you can unmute yourself and ask questions that way. And let me introduce our discussion leader, Amy Carney, the Deputy Director of Building Education for Students Together, a mom of six, Arizonan, and author and a major education activist. So we are so happy to have her as part of the team. And of course, we're happy to have her here with us tonight. So Amy, I hand it off to you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yes. So if you're not familiar with B.E.S.T, Building Education for Students Together, our mission is to ignite a national parent-led movement by building, educating, and mobilizing the largest network of parent activists in the country to advocate for their children's education through the election of school board members and the passage of policies that align with our vision of expanding educational freedom. So thank you for being here. And I want to introduce my two panelists today. Joining us on this webinar are two amazing Texas moms who are going to be sharing their knowledge and opinions on what they've seen and what they've learned about elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, known as ESSER. So first off, we're gonna hear from Missy Cara. Missy is a mom of two daughters, and she lives in Fort Worth. She just pulled her youngest daughter from the Fort Worth ISD school district and is now homeschooling, but she is a past director of Texas Parents' Rights and Education, and she continues to participate in state and national coalitions that advocate for children, parents, and educators. Next, we have Aileen Bukowski, who is a fellow mom of six, and she is the smart one. She moved not too long ago from California to Texas and lives in Prosper ISD. She's consulted for many nonprofits and grassroots cultural causes that promote life, religious liberty, and a parent's right to direct their children's education. She does work with Protect Our Kids, and we are so excited to have you both, and we can't just wait to hear what you have for us. So, Missy, I'm going to start with you first, and I'm hoping you can just help us understand what ESSER is exactly, right? Many of us don't even understand what this is, and is this federal funding a good thing for our students in our school districts or not?
Okay. Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Zach, for having me tonight. And also just hello and thank you all who have joined us this evening and spending your valuable time with us to learn more. One of the reasons that I'm very excited to share these things with you is because of who you are. And whether you are running for school board or already on school board or a community activist or a parent that's very interested in this topic, that you, all of you, are gatekeepers and voices for our children. So this stuff is very important to learn. And so let's get right to it. And I'll keep it very high level just so we can all stay together on this. What are these ESSER funds? So ESSER, again, stands for the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. And these are actually part of the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan for COVID-19. And so in summary about how much these are, just in this last year alone, just under 200 billion, and that's billion of your taxpayer dollars have been distributed to school districts all across the states, all across the US. And the way that these districts get it is by application and eligibility. And the most important thing that I want you to know about these funds is that they are actually actively being used to monetize, monitor, and indoctrinate your children. And that this is something you need to know. So when you're going to your school boards or monitoring what's happening there, that is what a lot of the bulk of this money is being used for. So a lot of people who are not familiar with it might look at these funds and think at first glance that they might be beneficial, but everybody on this webinar knows that nothing comes for free. Okay, so these funds have significant strings attached, and our next guest is going to talk about that soon. And what I think would be good for everyone is, since this to follow with what we're talking about, is to actually show you on a screen places where you can see about these funds and see how they're used. So we're going to do that now, and I'm going to hop over to my share screen for a second. And if y'all just give me just a minute to find where I need to go. Okay, so where we're going to start, sorry, y'all are seeing my little Zoom screen there. Oh dear. There. Okay, so in the chat, I think, or in an email, Zach is going to share with y'all some links so you can follow me. And these are going to be very Texas specific, because when we started with this, we did the seminar in Texas, but there'll be links for you in a minute with your states as well. What you can do is see how these ESSER funds are distributed, and I'm going to take you through our Texas website, which is through our Texas Education Agency. And if you can see everybody on our screen here, that this is about ESSER funds, and they're given in 3 different parts, a 1, a 2, a 3. Just wanted you to get to see this most recent funding that's given out, where it describes the education agency or the state education agency that's giving the monies. And you can see some allocation amounts that are done by the district. And in Texas, since we're, everything's bigger in Texas, I'll just tell you that this most recent distribution we got about $12.5 billion, which is just second highest under California. So we're talking lots and lots of money is given here. So just in case y'all want to follow along, Zach is going to post this stuff, and I'm going to move on just so we can get to it. So why do we want to know about following the money? You can see a place where it's been allocated, and I'm going to take y'all to, in my specific district where I just came from, Fort Worth ISD, where many districts like Fort Worth will show you how they're spending this money. Okay, so they'll take the amount of dollars that they're given, and they're supposed to accurately describe to the districts how these dollars are being spent. And I just wanted everyone to see how Fort Worth ISD is doing it. And so they go in and take some stakeholder priorities, where we have things that look good and things that look bad. And this comes to what you're talking about, Amy, is this good or bad? And keep in mind, all this money is to be spent for what we call COVID relief. And we're looking at things that need to be done in schools. That would be like safe and clean learning environments. Who doesn't want that? Improved technology access. Sounds good. Is it always good? Support for teachers. We always want to see good support for teachers. Increased instructional resources. That's another example that could be good, could be bad. But I just wanted you to see, if you can see where I'm circling around, it talks about priorities for the district, and then it'll break them down further. And I'm just, for the sake of time, going to zoom down through here so you can get some looks at dollar amounts that are just spent in our district, in Fort Worth ISD specifically. And these are things that you can go to your own districts and look for as well. If you Google in your school district ESSER funds and how it's spent, many of them, if not all, should be posting these dollar amounts so you can see how much is being spent, and then Aileen's going to cover what the implications of these are. So if you can see in Fort Worth ISD, they're trying to build teacher capacity, add support staff, add high quality instructional materials, lots of things that sound good, but also come with some strings attached. So just wanted you to see how they can word these things or tell you this is how it's being spent. One of the things when I first learned about these funds that I found interesting is that these funds are distributed, and the school districts are only to have to spend 20% of the dollars on recovering learning loss. We all know that the kids have all lost their learning since the time that COVID began to now. Wouldn't you think that all of these dollars would need to be going directly to learning loss? Well, when these funds got given, they have 80% of the dollars can be spent kind of at will by the districts. And before I hand it off to Aileen, I just want you to get to thinking, nothing comes for free. And I want to remind you what many of these districts are using this for is to monetize your student, to monitor your student, and indoctrinate your student. And so with that, I just wanted to get ready to hand it off to Aileen. And thank you all so much for having me. And I'll look forward to hearing questions that y'all might have in a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Missy. All right. Wow, that's frightening. It's overwhelming, actually. So thank you for showing us that. And I know Zach dropped a link or two there in the chat. Oh, I just heard my screen is off. Okay. Sorry about that. My screen was off. So I think Zach just dropped a link or two in the chat. So if anyone wants to jump on those links that Missy was showing you, just so you can see examples, feel free to take those out of the chat. And then, okay, Aileen, we want to know, how do we find out how much money our districts are receiving, and what specifically might these funds be used for, and what can go wrong if we're not paying attention?
Well, thank you, Amy and Zach, and thanks all of you for joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pop on my screen as well and see if we can't bring up, make sure that this is the right one. There we go. Okay. I'm going to put some of what Missy shared with you in context, so we can answer those questions that you just asked, because these are really big questions and a lot of money. Some of this might be a little bit of a repeat because Missy and I have been coming at this from different angles, but I think you're going to see a lot of similarities between the research findings. Okay, so here's what you need to know, and this is just a guide from Texas again, but you can find this information in your state and in your district. And when you see the data here, like Missy just showed you, you'd be very interested to find out what is happening with all that money, right? Everybody says, where's the money? Where's the money trail, right? So let me just put this in context. Pre-COVID, Texas schools were already lagging behind. As of 2019, Texas was ranked 35th out of 50 states. If you look over the far right corner there, that pre-K through 12 ranking in basically student outcomes, math, reading, and science. And so we were already spending a lot of money, but some people complain that Texas spends some of the least amount per student, but we weren't getting much for that money. We were already lagging behind. And what everybody knows is that COVID only made things worse, right? Students came home and we saw what was going on in our kids' classrooms. Learning standards had dropped. There was a lot of bending curriculum with indoctrination, and parents just started to see a big waste of time in their kids' schools. And that was evidenced, by the way, in state test scores last year when most of us came back into the classroom. In Texas, we saw a 32% drop in state test scores for those kids who continued learning online, and almost a 10% across the board learning loss for kids who were in person all year. So the learning loss is real, and it led parents to start asking a lot of questions. And across the country, you saw parents start to take matters into their own hands. They started taking up these issues and asking, what are they teaching our kids in the schools? And they got, they found out, and it was disturbing. This is what they found. They found a triple threat. Oh, I'm so sorry. They found a triple threat, what I call a triple threat of indoctrination in our schools, and that this was taking up more time than the academics. And it explains why we're seeing a lot of woke stuff in terms of library books and content and maybe CRT and some other things. And so we say that the triple threat comes in three places: sex and gender theory, critical race theory, and social emotional learning. Essentially, these are all critical theory driven they have a Marxist bent to them, really, and they're critical theory driven pedagogies that are popping up everywhere in our kids' school environment. And essentially, our kids are the ones at the ends of those strings. And there's a lot of federal money attached to those strings. So what's the problem? Well, the problem we got left with was the fact that our kids had significant learning loss. Sorry, I don't know if you can see that screen. I can't get rid of that and put it in the right place. And they were facing historic social, emotional, and mental health issues. And the Fed Ed solution was to come in with these hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID relief money. And then they were going to get access to 50 million American students. And what could go wrong with that? Well, I don't know. It was a little concerning that the same politicians and public health and education experts who insisted that we do these lockdowns and mask mandates and all of that are now promising to solve our problems that they caused with lockdowns and mask mandates with their money and their access to our kids. Oh, my slides aren't forwarding. Let's see if I can get that to go. You can learn more about this. This is going to become a very hot topic. This particular Newsweek article was just featured on Friday. I put the link up here. You can take a photo of the screen if you can capture that. Look that up. That article has a lot of good recent information. A lot of people concerned about actual student learning outcomes are beginning to sound the alarm. This money is out there, and what are they concerned about? $190 billion that Missy talked about, the largest influx of federal funding into education in history from the federal government, a lack of clear guidelines and transparency about what this money is supposed to be used for, and a huge lack of clear measurement guidelines on program effectiveness. There is nothing from the federal government that holds these school districts accountable in any way, shape, or form for increasing learning loss by 5%, by 6%, by no percent, by nothing. They just get the money. And this article points out what's really also very concerning is that very little of the money that has already been distributed to our schools is actually being spent. And so you're going to see, we've seen it here in Texas, lots of superintendents, long-term superintendents of very big, powerful school districts. They're starting to fly the coop. They're starting to retire quickly. Their schools are in great shape financially, and they don't want to be around for the rest of what's coming, and they're getting out of the education game. So we have this federal ESSER funding, and like Missy said, it is COVID relief money for schools. I call it a tsunami of indoctrination funding. It's supposed to be used for safe school reopening, preparing for and dealing with the effects of COVID, whatever that means. That's very broad. 20% of the funds are supposed to address learning loss. The other 80% are supposed to be used to prioritize social, emotional, and the mental health of students. So this is where we get really concerned, because I showed you that triple threat. And you have to ask yourself, oh, I just wanted to put this in here. A note on accountability, okay? There's only 2 points of accountability in any of the documents that come from the federal government, federal Department of Education. And you can Google this. You can just Google Federal Department of Education ESSER fact sheet, and you will find comparison of all of the three streams of funding. But the only accountability that's built into that is that in ESSER 3, which was known as the American Rescue Plan, every school district was required to form an ESSER advisory committee for their district. So go find out where that is in your district, find out who's on it, and find out what they're doing with the funding. And also under ESSER 3, schools were instructed to account for these funds separately. ESSER 1 should be kept separate from ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. What kind of funding are we talking about? This is why you want to be keeping an eyeball out, because we're talking about a lot of money. Missy mentioned these three, and I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can see my face box here, but it is in the way of my slide. Is it in the way of the numbers here for you? Or can you see my whole slide? Okay.
Nope, full slide.
Okay, thank you. So ESSER 1 was known as the CARES Act, passed by the U.S. Congress in March 2020, $1.2 billion. ESSER 2, known as CRISA, in December 2020, $5.5 billion. Look at all this money. Your state may have done something like Texas did, which took COVID relief funds for itself, and then passed more money onto schools, an additional $200 million in the case of Texas's supplemental ESSER 3 funding. This is really concerning. It's a lot of money. When you look at individual districts, What are we seeing? I mean, these may not mean anything to you if you're outside of Texas, but I mean, one school district with $66 million worth of funding, I mean, that's overwhelming. That's why I call this a tsunami wave of funding. This is a lot of times, this is my school district here, Prosper ISD. At first, I heard about the American Rescue Plan, ESSER 3, and I said, oh, well, our district only got $495,000, no problem. But then I went back and did the full deep dive, and I found out, oh, that's not true. We have almost 15 million. So you need to know who's managing that money in your district and what they plan to do with it. Some more totals that don't mean much to you. Round Rock ISD has been in the news. A couple of dads been arrested there for speaking out at school board meetings. How about Dallas? Almost $1 billion in Dallas. That superintendent just announced his retirement. Fort Worth that Missy just showed you, almost $500 million. And that superintendent also just announced his retirement. Small districts, large districts, this little godly ISD, they're a tiny little school district. A representative from this district just told me their overall budget, the entire budget for the whole district for a whole year is $23 million. They're sitting on over $3.5 million in federal ESSER funding. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. Aldine ISD, Aldine, however you say it. The Texans say Aldine, but I'm new here. This is where Viola Garcia, the president of the National Association of School Boards, is a trustee. This is the woman who called us domestic terrorists and sued the federal government on us. She has a district of only 63,000 students, and she's got $365 million worth of funding, and that equates to $5,798 per student. She could practically send every one of those kids to private school with the money she received. I don't think she's going to do that, though. And then look at over there at Houston, our largest school district in the state, $1.244 billion. You need to know who's managing this money in your district. Why are we concerned? Because with that prioritization on social, emotional, and mental health, our kids are going to be subject to things that parents may not be aware of. We're going to have to educate parents about social emotional learning. It's a Trojan horse. It sounds like things we want. We want our kids to be socially well-adjusted, emotionally strong. We want them to be able to be well-equipped to learn every day. But that's not what these SEL programs are after. They're going to bring in an equity focus, equal outcomes versus equality and equal opportunity to access learning, learning supports and learning priorities that would be most appropriate to them, so they'll be able to learn to their best ability. Students are going to be shaped, their attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs toward a collectivist idea that we are a one world or a member of a one world community, and what's best for the whole is the best for all of us. And we won't be focusing on our individual liberties. We're already seeing a shaving of that with our personal liberties, religious liberty, freedom of choice, on all kinds of things. Identity politics are going to take center stage. And this is really critical because SEL, now remember, they're saying that our kids have suffered socially, emotionally, and mentally for being home with their families. Now the school is going to come in and they're going to take care of our children, essentially take the place of parents, and they're going to take care of the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our kids. And the parents were the problem, see, because the kids came home and they stayed with us. And now the school is going to solve that problem. And that is just a hallmark of a Marxist strategy to create an oppressor and oppressed class. And it's hiding here inside social emotional learning. There's a lot of worldview shaping. SEL has some very dark roots. You can do a lot of research on it yourself if you want to know more about it. And of course, the federal funding. Loads and loads of federal funding. Some other concerns, things like daily mental health checks. Look, there are laws, federal laws. It's called the PPRA, the Parent and Pupil. I'm going to get it wrong. PPRA. Anyway, look that up. It essentially says that schools can't ask probing questions about personal things without parental consent. And that's a federal law. And a lot of these SEL programs, in order to be considered quality, need to have these data collection devices, including surveys and these daily mental health checks. So watch out for those. Things like guided imagery. This is a very dangerous psychological technique to guide children through, especially if you're doing this with non-trained individuals. A lot of people calling this out. A lot of student surveillance. They're looking to track data and see improvements or changes over time. If you didn't give permission for your student to be surveyed or surveilled, or for that data to be tracked, held, or sold, they're violating your rights as a parent, and our parental rights under, obviously, our authority is being undermined. Here is how you can locate your state's ESSER funding. The link to the website is there at the bottom. You can go to the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and you will see this graph here. They list by state and all the ESSER awards. You can see the certificate and agreement. You can see it all there. So whatever's there in terms of documentation from the federal government is there. You can also go to your own state's Department of Education, whatever that is in your state, search ESSER funding, and you should come up with a web page that would also have a listing by district in your state. You can also go to your school district website yourself and search ESSER funding or COVID relief funding. Okay, we laid a lot on you, and it's a little frustrating to get all fired up about something and not know what you can do about it. So I have a few ideas, but I have to tell you, I'm just scratching the surface. So we don't have all the answers. We're hoping that if we share this information with you, collectively, we'll all be able to keep working on this in our areas, and we'll come up with some really great strategies. But for now, what I can tell you is you must find and track what's going on in your state, in your county, in your district. Find that funding and get to tracking it. One of the best things, I'd love to see school districts do this, but I doubt they're going to do it. Give the money back. Just simply say, we are not going to surveil our kids. Essentially today, most Democratic, most blue states gave up all of their COVID policies. So I don't really know why we need back to school COVID safe reopening funding when none of those restrictions and those COVID things matter anymore. Ask a lot of questions. File public information requests. Just keep digging. You're going to find there's a lot of room for error when schools have this much money and very little to no guidance, and obviously no accountability on what the outcomes are for spending this money. Ensure that transparency and accountability are the number one thing in your district. And at least if you can't give the funding back, prioritize evidence-based student learning loss as the focus for that funding. And that's really what I have to share with you for today. Again, we're just scratching the surface on this, but we're open to taking some of your questions. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of deep diving you can do here, but most people are just going to need to know what's going on the top line so that they can get started doing the work of tracking and making sure that these funds are not being used for nefarious purposes, like shaping the worldview of our kids, turning them into sort of like Marxist drones that accept the state pedagogy, if you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amy and see if we can open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Aileen. Oh, I just learned something new every time. So let's open it up to questions. If you have questions about anything you heard or anything you know already about ESSER, put it in the chat and then we can ask our panelists. I did see one from Debbie, and she was asking, where is she? She's getting lost in here. If the district, I know she was asking, like, if the district isn't transparent about it, how can she find out right here? How can you find out the dollar amount in your district if they're not disclosing the amount of funds intentionally or how their ESSER funds are being spent? How can you find out?
In my district, in our state, actually, our Texas Education Agency actually listed the amount of funds by funding stream and by district. So you should be able to find out through your State Department of Ed, because all those funds actually came from the federal government to each state department, and each state department was mandated to shuttle those funds out to each district within 30 days of receipt. So those funds are already in your school district accounts, and the state already knows what they sent where. So you should be able to find that. And then also, of course, you can submit a public information request, which can be as simple as sending an email noting your state's laws, because every state has sunshine laws, which allow you to ask information about publicly funded organizations like schools. And so you can say, just according to our state's sunshine law, I want to know how much money in total you have received in federal COVID relief funds. And they have 10 days usually to kind of get back to you and let you know.
Exactly. And then something that I was learning after was that with the ESSER 3 funding, you're supposed to have meaningful and thoughtful discussion with the community, right? You're supposed to get input. So it's important for you to know in your district, how are they gathering input for your district? For mine, when I went in to Scottsdale to do some research, I saw, they're doing a survey. There's a survey there for me to go on and answer questions and say how I thought the money should be spent. But I didn't even know that existed, right? Until I went on to dive into what was going on in my district. So look into that, because it isn't a requirement that they are getting input from the community. So we want to be showing up and putting our 2 cents in of how we think this money should be spent.
And if I could tag on to that, Amy, in our district specifically, they did something called a stakeholder survey. So if you're looking for keywords to look for in your district, it might be called that. And what was interesting about our district in particular was they had already identified priorities for us and were asking us to number them in an order of 1 to 10 or 1 to 6. I don't remember exactly, but that they had already made those priorities. And I would encourage you to go and speak to your boards and let people know what your priorities are.
Very good. Yes, Karen, like you said, it's a shame we've got to do FOIAs and public record requests to get public information, but that's where we're at right now. And the good thing about doing webinars like this and learning from each other, is that we can all begin to get educated in this and push back and help our school board members, help our candidates that are going to be running. There's a lot of information on this. So what other questions do we have? Let's see.
Yep. We have a question from Stephen Ellis, who has his hand up. Stephen, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, thanks. And thanks for putting this on. Really appreciate it. Just a quick thought or question, really. Have any of you in your reach outs to boards requested and received and had them respond to a request for spending by vendor of ESSER funds? That would be, I think, a good way to identify where concentrated spending maybe is happening relative to specific vendors, and then, look into whether there's connection between board members and those vendors. Have you had any requests like that they've responded to or that you made?
I know in a very small little district in just south of the Dallas metro area, there's a team of parents who are already very concerned about social emotional learning. And then they found out about things in reverse. They found out about social emotional learning, and then they found out, oh my gosh, this is all being funded by this federal funding scheme. Like, oh, now it makes sense. And so they did public info requests. Their school district allowed them to see their check register on their school website. Some schools are that transparent, others are not. And they were able to find out the vendor was Second Step, it was called. That was the SEL program that their district was using. And they went in and they asked to inspect the curriculum, and they found some very troubling content in terms of videos that were being shown to kids in the junior high grades. They were actually all the triple threat. They were all in the triple threat category. So they were a little manipulative, and they were, CRT based, and they were the sex and gender that, all of that was there. And they brought that to the administration, and the administration said, oh my God, we didn't know. Okay, it's pulled. So some administrators are going to be really conscientious, and they're going to see what the problems are. They didn't know what they were taking up. They were told it was a good thing. I don't believe that it is the intent of many administrators and school districts to indoctrinate kids. I don't know that they realize that some of the definitions have changed over time, and that essentially SEL is now being used to transform society. That wasn't the case before 2020. That was not the definition, sort of the most accepted definition of social emotional learning. So yes, people are going after that, and it can be done. And where you don't get answers directly, you file a public information request.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a great example. Thanks.
Great. And then in the chat, we've got a question from Nikki. She says that we have districts in Michigan who openly shared with their community that ESSER funds were already spent before they came in, including the 20% that was named to learning loss. A FOIA isn't even necessary. This was reported at a trustee meeting in the district. What are the laws related to how requirements of the named dollars, and where can parents or board members report when the funding hasn't been spent accordingly? Essentially, is there an actual consequence?
I'm going to try to answer that the best that I can. And it's very state specific to Texas. I'm not familiar with every state, but in the state of Texas, that there are requirements that are outlined before the district ever received any funding. And it was part of their application and their eligibility that they have to define and describe what they're going to be using those funds for with their community. And so it might be that you have to look in your state distribution versus your district distribution to find out what the accountability is.
Great. And then Samantha in Pennsylvania, she's asking, are health and safety plans required with ESSER 3 funding? Good question.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the primary driver. That was the first thing. I think that Missy demonstrated that with her Fort Worth example. They were looking for safe and healthy learning environments for students. So that included things like PPE, plexiglass, cleaning supplies. Some school districts, switched out their whole HVAC systems and their air purifying systems. I mean, there's a lot of money out there. Construction could have even been part of some schools' programming in Texas that had to be approved before the funding was distributed to the district, but it wasn't off the table. So a lot of teachers got bonuses. There were all kinds of things. But yes, the primary driver was supposed to be safe environments for student learning.
And if I could I tag on a little bit on that too, is just when you're looking at your funding, that if anybody here is familiar with this thing called the Hegelian dialectic, where a problem is created so a solution can be presented. If you look at problems in the district that you're in, anything, especially the health and safety or the race relations or the social emotional health, what has happened here is that a problem has been created or identified so a solution can be presented. And often if you look at those problems, you're on one end or the other of that money trail. And so start looking at those big keywords in your district and you'll find stuff like that. Thanks.
Awesome. One thing I did see when I was diving into this was one thing I found disturbing is that they can give money to students and staff for being vaccinated. That is an approved thing that they can do. There's not a lot of things that are tied to mask wearing or vaccinations, but I did see that that is acceptable, that they can give a stipend to students or staff for being vaccinated. So you want to be, have your eyes open for what's going on. So another question, Jennifer has, do you have suggestions on reasonable improvement percentages when requesting evidence-based SLL?
You know what, this is something that I think is going to be very district dependent, and it also depends on the learning loss that your district experienced. So I would say in my local school district, our numbers were almost level, but in Texas, we were one of those first school districts that said, we're coming back. We're not going to go virtual. We're going mask choice. So in my district, you didn't see that kind of learning loss that many districts, like urban districts, large urban districts like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston saw. So I think that's going to be dependent on your district and the amount of learning loss that they already have tracked. And it's a very important conversation to have. I don't think you can just sort of give a number and say, well, they better improve it by at least 5%. I mean, it really depends on what tools they're using and the student population and a lot of things. So, but do make that a priority. I wish I was that I had a number for you, but it's going to be dependent on each individual district situation.
Exactly. And then Angela is asking, when you want to inspect curriculum, what is the process? And do you specify what you want to view? I guess this is in relation to curriculum they're bringing in under these ESSER funds.
Can I take that one? What's the process? Okay, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. First of all, I would just start right with your teacher. Like if you have a kid in the class, start there and say, I want to see it. And they'll probably invariably say, well, I can show it to you here at the school, but you can't take it home. You'll hear that a lot. And so start locally with your teacher, and that they'll bump you up the chain. You might wind up actually down in the administrative offices. Just having to keep it super short, I've gone through this process over a specific topic, comprehensive sex ed. And what you need to know is that things are being hidden. They're being withheld from parents. They are absolutely doing that in so many places. When you do have the opportunity to go, be very forceful, say, this is my right. I am able to see what my children are seeing. I want to see everything. I want to see the book. I want to see the slides. I want to see every presentation you have related, every video, everything, article, homework, all of it. And when you go, you need to also take a friend or 2 or 5. Take many people with you so that you have witnesses, and don't let them intimidate you, and don't let them tell you you can't see it because it's copyrighted. You absolutely have a right to see it.
Right. And I'll add to that. See this right here? This is a thumb drive. And every one of those curriculum these days come with a thumb drive. So if you don't see that in the binder or whatever it is they put down in front of you, ask for it, because this is where all the student worksheets are. This is where all the video links are. You want to make sure you get the thumb drive.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's all online. That's really where they'll put the textbooks out in front of you while they hide everything that's online. You want to make sure you're getting the full picture here. So, okay, we've got to wrap up. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we could all sit on here and chat about this and learn from one another, right, all night long. But what we're going to ask of you, if you have more questions, please reach out to us on the website parentsknowbest.com, and you can give us your questions, and we can get back to you, whether you want to talk to me or any of us at BEST or something for the panelists, and we can get that to them. So. We here at BEST, we just want to be here to provide you the information and resources that you need to help you on your education journey there in your state. So if you've got any, like I said, questions, you want to reach out, go to parentsknowbest.com, sign up for our emails. You also can text BEST. So you want to text B.E.S.T to 41490, and then that will get you signed up so you don't miss any of our trainings they're coming ahead. So we just appreciate you, Missy, so much, and Aileen for being here, bringing your wisdom. And we thank all of you for tuning in and continuing to share this with parents and school board members in your community.